A blood-red sun sets over the desolate plains of Kakora as the ground shakes beneath Marcus Donovan's boots. He's alone, surrounded by the remnants of an ancient battlefield, a once thriving city now reduced to rubble. His mission was clear, to uphold the no-fire zone. But as he scans the horizon, his fingers twitch near the trigger. In the distance, a small fleet of Mrenathy ships break the stillness of the sky, and for the first time since his arrival, Marcus realizes the hunt has already begun. The sky over Kakora was a burnt orange, a color that made the planet's wasteland look even more desolate. Marcus Donovan's boots crunched against the cracked earth as he stepped out of the transport shuttle. The air was thick with dust, stifling, as if the planet itself was trying to choke out any hope of life. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. He'd been to hostile planets before, but nothing quite like this. Kakora felt different. Like it was waiting. "Welcome to paradise," muttered Lieutenant Rojas, his second in command. Rojas was a seasoned soldier, his dark eyes hidden behind the reflective lenses of his helmet. His voice, though laced with sarcasm, betrayed a touch of unease. Even a veteran like him felt the weight of the mission here. Marcus nodded, his gaze lingering on the distant ruins. "Let's keep it tight. We're here to enforce the peace, not stir up more trouble." He turned toward the makeshift command center, a rusted, half-destroyed structure that barely held the perimeter. The no-fire zone was supposed to be a safe haven, a diplomatic barrier between warring factions. But Marcus knew peace here was an illusion, built on shaky foundations. As they moved towards the entrance, a voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, we've got trouble." Marcus stopped, instinctively reaching for his sidearm. "Go ahead, Private. Some locals, mercenaries, I think. They're moving on the south ridge. Looks like they're setting up for a hit." "Understood," Marcus said, his tone steady. He gestured for Rojas to stay behind while he approached the radio operator. "Send a recon team. Don't engage unless absolutely necessary. I'll deal with it." Marcus knew the drill. Mercenaries were a common sight on Kakora, but their presence always made things complicated. Officially, the planet was neutral, but everyone had their eyes on the resources buried beneath the surface. The no-fire zone was meant to protect the diplomats, but in reality, it was a playground for anyone with enough credits or firepower. He activated his comm link. "Alpha, move to the south ridge. Watch for any sign of movement. Report back in 10. The response came quickly. "Roger, Captain. On our way." Marcus stood still for a moment, taking in the barren surroundings. The wind howled, pushing dust and debris across the cracked earth. Above, the red sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ravaged landscape. "You think they'll respect the treaty?" Rojas asked, his voice more serious now. Marcus shot him a glance. "It's a treaty that only holds as long as someone has something to lose." As they made their way to the command center, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more dangerous than a few mercenaries. The zone may have been declared safe, but the stories he'd heard from his superiors didn't match the reality on the ground. Everyone had a stake in Kakora, some more obvious than others. Inside the crumbling facility, the smell of stale air and the faint hum of malfunctioning systems greeted them. A map of the planet sprawled across a wall, showing the current positions of galactic forces. The map flickered under the weak light, adding to the eerie ambience. "Captain Donovan!" A voice broke through his thoughts. He turned to face an officer with a grim expression. "The Mrenathy are pushing again. We've intercepted a communication. They're positioning their fleets." Marcus stiffened. "I thought the treaty held." "The treaty's a paper tiger, sir," the officer replied. "Zhrez isn't one to follow orders unless it suits him. We have no idea what he's planning, but it doesn't look good. We've been given orders to hold the line, but I don't know for how long." Marcus paced, considering their options. Holding the line was easier said than done, especially with a force as unpredictable and ruthless as the Mrenathy. General Zhrez had never been one for subtlety. Marcus had heard rumors of his brutal tactics, and the last thing he wanted was to be caught unprepared. "We need to know what we're up against," Marcus said. "I'm sending a team to the eastern perimeter. That's where they'll likely make their move. I want eyes on the ground. If anything goes wrong, we need to act fast." The officer nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Understood, Captain? But sir, we're stretched thin here. If they're planning something big—" "I know," Marcus interrupted. "We won't be caught off guard." Marcus turned to Rojas. "Get your gear. We leave in 5. An hour later, Marcus and his team were crouched behind the remnants of an old communications tower on the eastern ridge. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the landscape bathed in the eerie light of the twin moons. It was quiet, too quiet. The team moved with precision, checking their gear and scanning the horizon. Marcus could feel the tension building in the air. "Captain, we're getting signals," came the voice of one of his soldiers, Private Jennings. "Small, encrypted transmissions. Menethee codes." Marcus straightened, his instincts kicking in. "Let's move." They advanced slowly, their footsteps muffled by the shifting sand. The ridge ahead was littered with ruins, evidence of past battles, of worlds lost and forgotten. The ruins provided perfect cover, but they also made it difficult to read the situation. Marcus's mind raced through the possibilities. The Menethee could be planning an ambush, or they could be making preparations for something even worse. As they approached the signal's origin, the ground beneath them began to rumble. It wasn't the usual tremor of the planet's shifting tectonic plates. This was something else. A heavy vibration, low and insistent, followed by the unmistakable roar of engines. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. They weren't alone. "Fall back!" he ordered. Too late. The ground exploded as Menethee battle vehicles broke through the ridge, their weapons blazing. The mercenaries had been a diversion, and now Marcus and his team were caught in a firefight. The air was filled with the crackle of energy blasts, the smell of burned ozone, and the chaos of war. "Move, move!" Marcus shouted, pulling his team into action. They had the high ground for now, but that wouldn't last long. The Menethee were relentless, and their firepower was overwhelming. Marcus could see Rojas firing, his body moving in sync with the rhythm of the battle, but his mind was already calculating their next move. "We need to take out their leader," Marcus muttered. "Rojas, cover me." He sprinted toward a damaged building, hoping to find a vantage point that could give him a clear shot at the Menethee commander. As he moved, the landscape blurred, and his thoughts focused on the task ahead. The treaty might have declared the area no fire zone, but here, on the ground, it was anything but peaceful. The hunt had already begun. The firefight had left the eastern ridge smoldering, and as the echoes of battle faded into the vast silence of Kakra's wastelands, Marcus Donovan found himself in the belly of the beast. The no-fire zone wasn't a sanctuary, it was a ticking time bomb. He could feel the weight of the political games at play pressing down on him. No one in the Galactic Council wanted this war, but on Kakora, they were all too late. The factions had already drawn their lines, and humanity was stuck in the middle. Marcus sat in the makeshift command center, staring at the flickering holographic map. His fingers drummed on the table as he weighed his options. The Menethee weren't just making moves, they were executing them. The ambush on the eastern ridge had been no coincidence. It had been a calculated distraction to cover a larger scheme. But what? He couldn't allow himself to be a pawn in a war he wasn't sure was even about humanity's survival. "We've got a problem," Lieutenant Rojas said, stepping into the dimly lit room, his voice laced with exhaustion. "Intel's coming in fast, but it doesn't make sense. Menethee communications are all encrypted, but they're repeating certain codes. Almost like a countdown." "Countdown?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "To what?" "I don't know. But it's a hell of a coincidence. These codes keep popping up in places that shouldn't matter. If they're using this zone for something bigger, it's happening now." Marcus rubbed his jaw, his mind racing. He had known this was more than just a skirmish over territory. There was something far deeper at play. The Mrenithi had never been subtle in their methods, but the secrecy surrounding their movements hinted at something far more insidious. The no-fire zone was meant to be neutral ground, but Marcus was starting to believe it was nothing more than a front. I want to get close to their operations. If we can't break their encryption, we'll have to get our hands dirty, Marcus said, his tone hardening with resolve. Rojas hesitated. You're suggesting? Yeah. Marcus cut him off. We go undercover. We blend in. We find out what Zhraz is really up to. Rojas didn't look convinced, but Marcus didn't wait for his answer. The mercenaries, who had once fought for the highest bidder, now served as the perfect cover. Marcus needed to infiltrate their ranks. He had done it before, changing his appearance, adopting the mannerisms of a soldier for hire, but it was always dangerous. The mercs wouldn't hesitate to kill someone who didn't belong, and being a human in the midst of an alien power struggle only made things more complicated. The next morning, Marcus and Rojas slipped into the back alleys of a warlord-run settlement, the kind of place where the smell of gunpowder was as familiar as the air they breathed. The settlement was a hodgepodge of dilapidated buildings, black market vendors, and outlaws from every corner of the galaxy. No one asked questions unless you had credits to pay. Marcus knew how to talk the talk, and he would need to do just that if he was going to gain the trust of the mercenaries. A small group of them gathered near a rusted bar, exchanging war stories over drinks. Their faces were scarred, their eyes cold. Marcus walked toward them with his head low, hands in his pockets, exuding the same air of indifference he had learned to project. Rojas stayed back, monitoring their movements from a distance. He made eye contact with one of the mercenaries, a burly figure covered in tattoos and scars. The mercenary, a tall Sryan with a snarl permanently etched into his face, motioned for him to come closer. Not many human faces around here, the Sryan said, his voice rough like gravel. You lost or just looking for a paycheck? I'm here for the job, Marcus replied, his voice steady. He'd learned long ago how to mask any hint of uncertainty. Word is, you know how to make things disappear. The Sryan's lips curled into a grin. We don't do things by the book, human. But you're right about one thing. Zhraz pays well, and he's got work for people like you. Marcus felt the first crack of tension in his gut. The mention of Zhraz's name wasn't a coincidence. This was the opening he needed. He leaned in, speaking in a low, steady voice. I can be useful. I've got experience handling things that others can't. The Sryan studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether Marcus was bluffing. I'll take you to the boss. If you're as good as you say, maybe we'll get along. The walk to the inner compound of the mercenary camp was tense, every corner they rounded offering a new set of dangers. Marcus kept his hand on the grip of his sidearm, though it wasn't drawn. He had to play this right, maintain his cover. His senses were sharp, picking up on every movement, every whisper in the shadows. It was only a matter of time before his presence would be questioned, but for now, he was in. They stopped at a small, fortified building. Inside, the air smelled of stale food and old blood. In the center of the room sat a thin, middle-aged man with sharp eyes and an unnerving calm about him. His species, the Qrath, was known for its cold precision in battle. He didn't need to introduce himself. Marcus already knew who he was. Welcome, the Qrath said, his voice measured. I've been expecting someone like you. Marcus straightened, his heart pounding in his chest. I'm here to help. But I need to know what's going on. Zhraz operations, there's more to it than just skirmishes. The Qrath smiled thinly. You're smarter than I gave you credit for. You're right. There's more. And now you're part of the problem. Before Marcus could react, a door slid open, revealing a set of screens displaying encrypted transmissions. The Qrath motioned for Marcus to come closer. The Mrenithi aren't just here for resources. They're setting up something much bigger. Something that will shift the balance of power in this galaxy. The Qrath's voice dropped to a whisper. And you, Captain Donovan, are now involved. As Marcus stared at the screen, the weight of the situation hit him. This wasn't just about defending humanity's interests. It was about stopping a war that could plunge the entire galaxy into chaos. But the more he learned, the more it felt like the galaxy was already on the edge of the abyss, and he was one of the few who knew it. Before he could formulate a response, an explosion shook the building, sending debris flying. Marcus didn't flinch. He was already moving, reaching for his sidearm. This wasn't the first time he'd found himself in the middle of a firefight, and it wouldn't be the last. Stay low, the QRAT snapped. The hunt had begun again. The explosion had been no random blast. Marcus felt the shockwave reverberate through his bones, and the ground beneath him seemed to vibrate with the force of it. He didn't wait for any order. His instincts had already taken over, and he was moving before the dust settled, racing toward the doorway. The mercenary compound was under attack, and it was clear that whoever was behind it knew exactly what they were doing. Rojas' status? Marcus barked through his comms as he crouched behind a nearby pillar. He kept his eyes on the shadows, expecting movement at any moment. We're still inside the perimeter, Captain. Rojas's voice crackled in his ear. We're holding, but it won't be long before they get to us. Stay sharp, Marcus replied, his eyes scanning the compound's entrance. There were no surprises in the layout. This was a tactical compound built for defense. But the mercenaries were outnumbered, and this attack had the smell of a well-organized offensive. The QRH's voice cut through the chaos, his calm demeanor in stark contrast to the mayhem around them. You want to know what Zhraz is planning? This is part of it. He's mobilizing a strike force, and the moment he secures control here, he's launching a full-scale assault on the eastern sectors. This compound is just the first step. Marcus's gaze locked onto the encrypted transmissions flickering across the QRH's screen. The military-grade encryption made it nearly impossible to crack without the right tools, but what was more concerning was the timing. Zhraz was on the move, and Marcus was in the middle of it. Why here? Marcus asked. Why this compound? Because it's neutral ground, the QRATH answered, a dangerous gleam in his eyes. Zhraz knows the Galactic Council won't intervene while there's a peacekeeping force here. He's using this zone to cover his tracks. Marcus clenched his jaw. The no-fire zone, created to maintain peace and avoid escalation, had become the perfect cover for Zhraz's power grab. It was a brilliant strategy, too brilliant. It made him think that someone, somewhere, had to know about it. Before he could respond, another explosion rocked the building. This time, it was closer, and the blast sent a shockwave through the structure. The lights flickered, and the hum of the generators died down, leaving only the distant sound of weapons fire echoing from the outer perimeter. Let's move, Marcus ordered. We need to find out what they're really after. This is just a distraction. He gestured for the QRATH to lead the way, his weapon at the ready. They moved through the compound's narrow hallways, each corner filled with the sound of shouting mercenaries and the occasional burst of gunfire. The layout was simple, but the chaos had thrown off their sense of direction. Marcus knew they couldn't afford to wait. Time was a luxury they didn't have. They reached the secure room at the heart of the compound, where the Mrenathi communications were stored. It was a high-security area, and the QRATH had to enter a code to bypass the lockdown. As the door slid open, Marcus's eyes immediately locked on the array of holographic screens that filled the room. But it wasn't the screens that held his attention. It was the person standing in the center of the room. A woman, tall and confident, her eyes cold with the calculating look of someone who had seen war from every angle. She stood at the center of the room, studying the data. Her uniform was a blend of military efficiency and personal style, a sign of her high rank in Zhraz's forces. She turned toward Marcus, her lips curling into a knowing smile. I see we have a guest, she said, her voice smooth but edged with menace. Captain Donovan, isn't it? We've been expecting you. Marcus's hand instinctively tightened around his weapon, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. And you are? I'm Major Vora, she said, stepping forward. Her gaze was steady, unblinking. I have been overseeing the operations here. You've made a dangerous mistake coming here, Captain. Marcus's heart rate quickened, but he kept his composure. I don't make mistakes. But I'm starting to see a bigger picture here. Zhraz forces aren't just here for control. You're setting up something. What is it? Vora's smile deepened, but her eyes held no humor. You're perceptive. Zhraz is preparing to reset the balance of power in this sector. The no-fire zone is a smokescreen. We've been infiltrating key positions across the galaxy. The Mrenathi are spreading their influence faster than anyone realizes. And you, Captain, are caught in the middle. Before Marcus could respond, the doors to the rooms slammed shut with a deafening clang. A surge of panic shot through him. Vora's smug expression didn't falter, but Marcus's instincts were on high alert. They were trapped. I'm afraid you won't be leaving with the answers you came for. Vora continued, her voice almost apologetic. Zhraz isn't one to let loose ends remain. Marcus's eyes flicked to the monitors. The encrypted data was still running, but it wasn't a coincidence. The Mrenathi had orchestrated this to be a controlled situation. They knew he would come. They knew he would be digging for answers. The room was silent for a moment, the tension palpable. And then, as if on cue, the screens began to flash with a new series of coordinates. Marcus's mind raced as he deciphered the message. It wasn't just about Kakora. The attack wasn't going to stop here. It was just the beginning. The coordinates pointed to a series of locations across the galaxy, all interconnected by something far greater than a simple military operation. Vora watched him closely, her posture relaxed, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. You'll soon understand, Captain. What Zhraz has planned goes beyond anything you could imagine. It's too late to stop now. Marcus stepped closer to the monitors, his mind working rapidly. If he could access the data, if he could pinpoint Zhraz's next move, they might stand a chance. He quickly pulled up the map, his fingers flying over the controls. The coordinates matched perfectly, leading directly to the heart of Mrenathi power. The trap was set. But Marcus wasn't done yet. Before Vora could react, he slammed his fist against the emergency override button, sending a surge of electrical energy through the room. The lights flickered and then went out completely. The emergency alarms blared, signaling a complete lockdown. He didn't wait to see what happened next. He darted for the exit, his hand already reaching for his weapon. Rojas's voice crackled through the comms. Captain, we've got movement. They're coming for you. I know, Marcus replied. Get ready. The game had just changed. And for the first time since landing on Kakora, Marcus knew he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for the future of the galaxy. The lockdown alarms were deafening as Marcus sprinted through the darkened corridors of the mercenary compound. The emergency lights flickered in a strobe pattern, casting long, erratic shadows on the walls. He could hear the sound of boots pounding behind him, more Mrenathi soldiers, their pursuit relentless. Marcus didn't need to look back. The adrenaline was already flooding his system, pushing him forward, urging him to move faster. The plan had changed, but survival was still the objective. Rojas, status! He barked into his comms as he skidded around a corner, his boots slipping slightly on the slick floor. We've got a problem, Captain. Rojas's voice came back, tense. The Mrenathi are flooding the area. We can't hold them back much longer. They're too well organized. Marcus cursed under his breath. They had to move. Fast. If they stayed in the compound much longer, they'd be trapped. He took a hard right into another hallway, his eyes darting around for any possible escape. The entrance was compromised, but the service tunnels beneath the compound were still intact. He remembered the map they'd studied before the mission, and he knew the tunnel system was their only hope. But it wasn't going to be easy. We need to rendezvous in the underground tunnels, Marcus said, voice clipped. Get there, now. There was a brief pause. Then Rojas replied. Copy that. We're en route, but there's a lot of resistance. Marcus didn't have time to worry about the rest of his team. He reached the hatch leading into the service tunnels. With a grunt, he ripped it open and dropped into the darkened shaft below. The air was musty, heavy with the smell of old machinery and stagnant water. The hum of distant generators reverberated through the walls. He pulled out his flashlight and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The tunnels were claustrophobic. Narrow, with jagged pipes running along the walls and metal grating underfoot. Marcus's mind raced through options, but he knew they needed a secure way out, one that wouldn't leave them exposed. The Menethi would follow, but they'd have to guess where they'd gone. This underground maze could be their cover. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy them time. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise above, a thud, then another, followed by a shout. The Menethi were close. They'd found the tunnel entrance. The sound of boots echoed louder in the narrow passageway, and Marcus's grip tightened on his weapon. He moved quickly, ducking under a series of pipes and crouching low to stay out of sight. Ahead, he saw a flicker of movement. Someone was coming. He held his breath, pressed against the tunnel wall. The footsteps grew louder. A Menethi soldier, his rifle drawn, appeared from around the corner, scanning the darkness. Marcus's pulse quickened as he waited for the perfect moment. With a swift movement, Marcus sprang from his hiding spot, tackling the soldier to the ground. The rifle clattered away, and Marcus twisted the soldier's arm behind his back, applying enough pressure to force him into submission. The Menethi grunted, but Marcus's hand clamped down on his throat, cutting off any chance of a scream. "Where's Vora?" Marcus growled, his face inches from the soldier's. The Menethi blinked, disoriented, but fear was creeping into his eyes. "You think you'll survive this?" he spat. "I didn't ask for a lesson in survival," Marcus replied coldly. "Where is she?" The soldier's eyes darted toward a metal door further down the tunnel. "She's waiting for you. All of you." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. It was a trap, but the more the Menethi resisted, the more it became clear that they were luring him into something much larger. Still, there was no choice now. He had to follow. He released the soldier, who scrambled to his feet and staggered away, muttering under his breath. "Don't waste my time," Marcus muttered, then turned and headed toward the door. The door was heavy, reinforced steel with an access panel next to it. Marcus pressed a series of codes into the terminal, the flashing lights signaling that it had been unlocked. As the door slid open, he stepped into a large chamber, dimly lit by flickering overhead lights. The room was filled with Menethi soldiers, their guns trained on the entrance. At the far end of the room, standing with her back to him, was Major Vora. She turned slowly as Marcus entered, a predatory smile crossing her face. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she said smoothly, her voice dripping with amusement. Marcus's gaze hardened, but he didn't let his guard down. "What's your game, Vora?" Vora stepped closer, her boots echoing on the metal floor. "My game? It's simple, really. Ztraz is on the verge of victory. He's already moving his fleets into position. And you, Captain Donovan, have just become an unwitting pawn in a much larger strategy. Don't play games with me. I've seen the coordinates," Marcus snapped, his eyes narrowing. "You're planning something far bigger than just taking Kakora. So you've been digging, have you?" Vora laughed, though it held no warmth. "You're right. This is just a stepping stone. But you're a perfect distraction. A thorn in our side that we'll remove at the right moment." Marcus stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not here to play games, Vora. I'm here to stop this." "Stop it?" Vora's eyes gleamed, her smile turning cruel. "You think you can stop Ztraz? He's already 10 steps ahead of you. You're just one piece in his plan, Donovan. And when you fall, it won't matter." Marcus's mind raced as he considered his options. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about stopping Ztraz before he could unleash something catastrophic. The galaxy couldn't afford to let the Menethi succeed. But the reality was, Marcus was outnumbered and trapped. He played his cards, and now he had to think fast. "Maybe it's time to reset the game," Marcus said, a hint of resolve in his voice. Before Vora could react, Marcus pulled the detonator from his vest. He planted it earlier in the compound's central hub, knowing this was the only way to take out the Mrenith's advantage. The device was set to overload the main power core, an act of desperation, but one that could force their hand. The room fell silent as Marcus pressed the button. A low hum filled the air, followed by a series of tremors. "You're insane!" Vora shouted, her eyes wide with fury. "Maybe. But it's better than letting you win." The blast rocked the compound with a force that nearly sent Marcus to the floor. The lights flickered once, then twice, before the entire room plunged into darkness. The hum of the emergency backup generators kicked in, but it wasn't enough to mask the growing sense of panic in the air. Marcus stood motionless, the detonator still gripped tightly in his hand. He could feel the vibrations in the metal walls as the shockwave reverberated through the facility. The countdown had begun, but this wasn't just about escaping now. This was about ending the Mrenithi threat before it could consume everything. He wasn't walking away from this fight, he was finishing it. "You really think this will stop Chatraz?" Vora's voice cut through the silence, sharp and mocking, but there was a hint of desperation beneath her words. "You've activated the core overload, but you've also sealed your fate. There's no way out now." Marcus didn't respond, his mind already processing the next move. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, scanning the room for any signs of weakness in the Mrenithi forces. They were stunned, confused, but it wouldn't last long. The explosion had sent a clear message. The game had changed, and it was no longer in their favor. Without a second thought, Marcus dove toward the nearest cover, a collapsed metal crate still warm from the blast. He didn't waste time peeking out. He knew the Mrenithi would be coming for him in full force. His focus narrowed as he breathed in, counting his heartbeats. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. "Rojas," he muttered into his comms, the only link to his team. "Status report." "Now." "Captain, we're in position. But it's bad. The Mrenithi have secured the exits, and we can't make a clean break. They're hunting us." "We don't need clean," Marcus replied, the tension in his voice barely contained. "We need to hit them hard. Do you have a visual on the main security hub?" A brief pause followed, then Rojas's voice came back, tinged with uncertainty. "Yes, sir. It's 2 floors up, but there's heavy fire on the stairwells. We've got enemy reinforcements blocking our way." Marcus clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a firefight, it was a full-scale assault. The countdown clock was ticking, and if he couldn't take control of the situation now, they were all dead. "I'll take care of it. You and your team, keep them busy." "I'm going up," Marcus said. He turned his attention back to the Mrenithi soldiers, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the room. The sounds of the emergency alarms were starting to drown out the distant voices and footsteps of the soldiers converging on his position. He didn't have time to wait. The power core was on the verge of a meltdown, and if the facility was destroyed, Chatraz's plans would be set back by months, possibly even years. This was his chance to put an end to it. Marcus moved silently, stepping around the edge of the crate and using the shadows to conceal his movements. As he approached the stairwell leading up to the security hub, he could see the flickering light of Mrenithi soldiers moving in formation. The stairwell was narrow, a perfect choke point. He grinned to himself. If he was going to make a stand, this was the place. With a controlled breath, Marcus reached for his rifle, his finger tapping lightly on the trigger. He didn't wait for them to spot him. Instead, he opened fire, the controlled bursts of his weapon cutting through the dim light with deadly precision. The first soldier dropped instantly, his body crumpling to the ground. The second soldier tried to duck for cover, but Marcus was faster. Another shot rang out, and the second soldier fell, lifeless. The third soldier hesitated for only a moment before charging forward, a defiant snarl on his face. But Marcus had already calculated the angle. He ducked behind a column, using it as cover before launching himself forward, meeting the soldier with a swift elbow to the chest. The Mrenithi staggered back, momentarily stunned, but Marcus didn't give him a chance to recover. In a fluid motion, he swung his rifle into the soldier's side, knocking him out cold. He was moving quickly now, adrenaline pumping through his veins. The stairwell was empty for the moment, but Marcus knew better than to think it would stay that way for long. He had mere minutes before the Mrenathi regrouped. He had to get to the control room. As he ascended the stairs, the hum of the facility around him seemed to get louder, the sound of machinery reverberating through the walls. He reached the second floor and ducked behind another set of crates, listening for any movement. The security hub was just ahead, its door guarded by a pair of heavily armed Mrenathi soldiers. Marcus waited for them to move past, holding his breath as they entered the hallway just beyond his cover. He counted to 3, then silently moved forward, using the shadows to his advantage. The soldiers were too busy watching the hall to notice him approach. He acted quickly, closing the distance, grabbing the nearest soldier from behind, and snapping his neck with a single, smooth motion. The second soldier turned, but it was too late. Marcus was already there, the butt of his rifle crashing into the soldier's face. The soldier crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The security hub's door was now in front of him, and Marcus wasted no time. He keyed in the override code, a series of numbers drilled into his memory. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the control room, its blinking consoles and humming terminals filling the room with an eerie glow. Inside, a lone Mrenathi technician stood at one of the terminals, frantically trying to override the core's meltdown sequence. The technician's eyes widened in panic as Marcus entered, rifle raised. "You're not stopping this." The technician spat, sweat pouring down his face. "Zhrez will make sure of that." Marcus took a step closer, his voice low. "Not if I can help it." He didn't wait for the technician to respond. With a quick motion, he pulled the technician aside and accessed the terminal. The core was on a countdown, but there was still time to initiate a failsafe, a sequence that could delay the meltdown long enough to get everyone out. Marcus punched in the code, feeling the pressure building as the seconds ticked away. The screen flashed green, sequence initiated. Marcus exhaled in relief, but it was short-lived. The technician, still struggling to recover, lunged for his weapon. Marcus reacted instinctively, slamming his knee into the technician's stomach, knocking the wind out of him. "This is over," Marcus said, his voice firm as he restrained the technician. "Zhrez won't win this time." Just then, his comms crackled to life. "Captain, we've got movement. We're on our way to you, but you've got about 2 minutes before the place goes down. Get out, now!" Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He activated the emergency evacuation sequence, the room lighting up with red flashing warnings. As he turned to leave, the explosion from the reactor's core trembled beneath his feet. The countdown was nearly finished. He wasn't out yet. But he was close. The Mrenathi would never know what hit them.